Let's dive into some SEC scrimmage intel because there's a lot going on down here, and then I'm going to expand it nationally in just a second to keep you up to date on. Before we even get into predictions, I got to update you on Alabama. We've been watching that wide receiver group. A lot of people nationally are looking at that wide receiver group if you're trying to nitpick and saying, "Ooh, I don't recognize a lot of those names." Well, number 11 here, Trayshawn Holden's a perfect example of names that you probably remember if you follow recruiting hardcore, and you've seen him pop on the screen a time or two for Alabama, but he hasn't been, as of yet, a Jalen Waddle or a Devontae Smith. Well, it sounds like his time has arrived. They had a scrimmage there in Tuscaloosa yesterday. He had 3 touchdowns. They were all over 50 yards, so they were the explosive play variety. He is a guy. He's never been a weakness. It's never anything like that. It's just sometimes you got to wait your turn when you're at Alabama, and if you don't immediately, as a true freshman, folks can forget about you. Well, Trayshawn Holden was decent as a true freshman, but he's one, along with Jermaine Burton and Ja'Cory Brooks, I don't call Brooks a veteran, but the more established presence is there. He's the next guy that it sounds like is ready to pop, along with freshmen like Kobe Prentice. Isaiah Bond is probably the fastest out of that whole group. I'm looking forward to watching them. You know what we don't really talk about a lot with Bama, we know we talk about them a lot, but we don't talk so much about the fact that they may have the best 1-2 combo at running back in the country if Jace McClellan is healthy and 90+% of what we know he's capable of, because they got Jahmyr Gibbs there at RB1. So, man, they're going to be really good this year. How good? We'll see. We're going to predict them later in the show. Texas A&M. I want to address something with A&M. There's some conflicting intel from Texas A&M. I'm talking even about some folks who watch the same scrimmage and come away thinking different things. You got some folks who say, "Ooh, this offense still feels kind of herky-jerky. Haynes King throwing one too many interceptions for me at practice today." I don't think folks understand how good they are defensively, how deep they are defensively. And I don't think you get how hard it is to scrimmage when you got a number of your premier playmakers out that you will have on Saturdays in the fall. Here's what I think I know about A&M. Number one, they're going to be better offensively. How much better is a valid question. I think Haynes King is your guy at quarterback. Does he sustain that the whole year? That's a valid question. I think that some players being out in these scrimmages, along with increasing amounts of depth up front defensively, have sort of thrown perception out of whack. They're not facing themselves. It's not maroon on white come Saturday in the fall. You're facing Miami. You're facing Mississippi State, in which case it still will kind of be maroon on white. You get the picture, though. This happens sometimes when teams are elevating from good to either very good or good to eventually great. Sometimes even the local fans don't really understand what they're watching. I've seen this with Georgia. Georgia just won a national championship. And sometimes I would listen to scrimmage intel and I would listen to practice reports, and you don't know how to properly gauge it because you don't know how good each side of the ball is and how one side of the ball is impacting the other. A&M's going to be fine. Are they going to be good enough offensively to win the West? I don't know. That's what we made the segments later in the show for. But I think Haynes King's going to be just fine. I think you will see increase in the explosivity rate offensively this year. I just think it's going to kind of be a work in progress. That doesn't mean Connor Wegman couldn't make a move. That's just because he's that good. I don't think it's going to be because King's a weakness. So let's take everything that we hear from College Station and let's try and run it through the proper filter. I humbly ask that. What about Georgia? They just won a national championship. You know, if you've been watching Late Kick, we hadn't really been focused on the quarterback talk a lot of people do nationally because we know who it is and we know who he is in Stetson Bennett. I am very fascinated and have been for a few weeks now at the number 2 corner position opposite Keely Ringo. And it sounds like Kamari Lassiter has just locked that thing up. Now, that's who we expected to lock that position up, but it is sort of comforting, given all indications that we've gotten out of Athens, that he's done it with a couple of weeks to go before they play Oregon, because now you can start to domino your way through the rest of that secondary, and you can start to build out your depth, and you can start to get guys the appropriate amount of reps and practice. I'm not telling Kirby Smart anything he doesn't know, but I think sometimes when you're watching this, you think to yourself, oh, it doesn't matter when they figure it out, just as long as they figure it out. Oh, it matters. You want to get that thing figured out as quickly as possible because of that rep situation. They don't let you practice 4 hours a day, guys. They give you a very, very fine window in which you can practice. And so Kamari Lassiter, that's really good news. That's really good news because of, number one, what I just stated. Number two, it's a good thing that Georgia's figuring out their corner rotation, because there is going to be, how shall I put this, an increased emphasis on the importance of that position for Georgia this year. when you lose a bunch of guys to the NFL at the positions they lost them, now that doesn't mean woe is me next year. It may mean you got to win a different way, and I think that's valid for Georgia, but they lost so much defensive front talent, generational talent, to the NFL that positions like last year that you may have been able to hide guys at, I'm thinking of Darian Kendrick, for example, this year could be put under more of a microscope. And so if I've got Ringo there and I've got a Kamari Lassiter who is taking the position by the throat and can improve week by week, and then I got guys on the back end like a number of them, Stokes not the least of which, could grow into starting roles at some point during this year, that's a good thing. Georgia's secondary is going to be tested a lot more this year than it was last year. They need those guys. This is a big headline for them. Florida, this is not going to be really big hidden news. I just don't know that folks really understand how big it is. Anthony Richardson's a really good football player. That you know. He's a starting quarterback at Florida. Any of you who got a taste of him last year, you probably looked and you said, boy, that guy's got a lot of potential. That number 15 there, I don't care what his nickname is. He's got a lot of potential. He is on the fringe of the Heisman odds when you're, looking on YouTube right now, if you're looking at the chart there. I'm not so much focused on that. I don't think he has the talent around him at receiver to propel himself into that conversation. But I do think he is a talent, and this is being echoed by everyone. I mean, everyone around the Florida program. He's the kind of talent that can change the outcome of multiple games for them this year. Now, they got to be close, so they can't be turning the ball over 4 times, and that's on him as well as others. But he's the kind of guy, he's the fall forward kind of guy. He's the kind of broken play, by any means necessary, make it happen kind of guy. A few times a game that you remember Auburn having in 2010. This is not the Cam Newton comparison thing, so save the individual clips that make it sound like that. But the Cam Newton effect was that around him, that Auburn offense was not much to write home about. But he single-handedly took them and drugged them to a national championship. I don't expect Florida to make it that far this year, but I do expect them to win some games that when the dust settles, you look at 15 and say, he drugged that team to a win this afternoon. That's incredible what he just did. Anthony Richardson, you keep him healthy, which, guys his size tend to do more frequently than smaller guys. I think he can do some very special things this year. And it's something that you've read in preview magazines, and maybe your own eyeballs have told you it's being validated so far throughout fall camp. That's the important part. Last but not least here in the SEC, sounds at Auburn like Brian Harson's ready to name a starting quarterback. I got to go on record as saying this one has not gone the way that I necessarily expected it to go. I thought Zach Calzada was going to be more of a factor here, and he may be later in the year, but it's just not the case now. In fact, he's probably the third option for them. TJ Finley sounds, for all intents and purposes, like he's locked up this quarterback position, and it's so imperative because, it's the quarterback position, but also there is no team in America, especially in the SEC, that needs a fast start more than Auburn, because that over-under win total is 6 for a reason. They are deficient in some areas, but their schedule gives them a chance. It gives them a lot of runway. They got 2 what should be layup games to start the year in Mercer and San Jose State, and then the next 3 are losable games, but they're also winnable games. These won't be big point spreads either way, and all 3 of them, Penn State, Missouri, LSU, back-to-back-to-back, they're all in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Which begs the question, what kind of quarterback play are you getting? Auburn's going to be good enough. Their overall just sheer talent roster, while not top 5 or top 10, is still plenty good enough to hang in every one of these games. They've got to basically play an SEC version of Iowa football. And for those of you who've watched Iowa, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who've watched Auburn last year, you know they're fully capable of it. Now, what I wonder is there any added pop? Does TJ Finley give you any added pop? Because they're saying all the right things about him down there, but when do you not say all the right things? You don't name a starting quarterback and then say, we're going to have to win in spite of him, though. I know I just named him my starter, but he leaves a lot to be desired. Of course you don't say that, but yet that's how I felt when I watch him play at times last year. So I'm very interested because they, obviously as a coaching staff, have either seen enough from him that he is improved enough to lead them, or there's that B scenario, which we don't want to entertain, and that's just he's the starter because of lack of options. So let's just cross our fingers because we've got an over win total bet on Auburn. So let's cross our fingers and hope that's the case. I do wonder with Zach Calzada, that's a guy who was injured, didn't get spring. So I guess it's not the craziest thing to imagine that he couldn't come right in a new program, absent spring ball, and lock down a starting job. I wonder, once they get into the season, because we know it'll get rocky eventually. It even gets rocky for the eventual championship teams. If it gets rocky for them and they lose a couple of games, is it just TJ Finley wire to wire? Or week over week in practice, do we see Zach Calzada get healthier and healthier, and do we see him maybe make a move? Is Robbie Ashford a guy making a move? I keep leaving him out irresponsibly because he'd be the one probably taking starting reps right now if it weren't for TJ Finley. So that's an update from around the SEC.